The canine began barking at a massive lump on the ancient tree. The officer sliced into it and frozen in shock. The woods remained silent, almost breathing with their shadows. However, Rex, the service shepherd, abruptly tensed up and barked as if observing something living inside the old wood. Police officer Artyom shuddered. His dog had never reacted this way. On the trunk, a strange growth darkened, from which a thick black fluid, resembling blood, was oozing. Artyom raised his knife, slashed the surface, and instantly recoiled, nearly dropping the blade. He certainly hadn't expected to see this. For several seconds, Artyom simply stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the sliced growth. His heart pounded in his throat. He was used to oddities, having worked on patrol for 7 years, and forest calls rarely surprised him. But this was different. Too silent, too wrong. Rex continued to growl, though less furiously now. More cautiously, as if trying to warn his master but not knowing exactly how. Artyom ran his palm over the dog's withers, attempting to calm both the animal and himself. Stepping closer, he carefully pried apart the edges of the cut with the knife. Under the bark, a bundle appeared. No. Not a bundle. Something dense, grayish, uneven. It resembled fabric. As if someone had hidden an object or worse, a part of something living, inside the tree. Artyom exhaled, forcing himself to concentrate. Steady, Rex, we'll figure it out now. He retrieved a flashlight and shone it inside. The beam reflected off a metallic glint. Artyom frowned. Metal. Inside a tree. He widened the incision. From beneath the bark, the corner of a small metal canister emerged, covered in rust and tree resin. It looked as though it had lain here for decades. What on earth, he whispered. The container was firmly grown into the wood, as if the tree were trying to consume it, to hide it from prying eyes. Artyom grabbed the protruding edge, pulled, and the container crunched, shifting slightly. In response, a quiet metallic ring came from within. Rex snarled again, backing away. A chill ran down Artyom's spine. All right, he told himself. Now I definitely have to open it. It was too late to retreat. He made another incision, pried the container's edge with the knife, and at that moment, something thumped dully inside. Artyom froze. Rex did too. The forest became absolutely silent again. Artyom stood completely motionless, listening to the quiet. It seemed even the wind decided to hide. Only somewhere high in the tree crowns, a bird flapped barely audibly. But the sound he heard a second ago was not of nature. It was too distinct, too familiar, as if something metallic had struck the inner wall of the canister. Rex growled softly and slowly walked closer, standing side by side with his master. Artyom felt how tense every muscle in the dog was, and this was more alarming than the strange container. Rex was never wrong. He sensed danger before a human could understand it. It's okay, boy, whispered Artyom, though he didn't believe it himself. He shone the lantern into the cut again. The metal object looked ancient, covered in dark spots. Artyom thought it might be some sort of time capsule. People sometimes hide such things in unexpected places, but then there shouldn't be any sounds inside, and certainly nothing moving. He grasped the metal corner with both hands and pulled harder. The tree creaked, as if unwilling to release its secret. The container yielded, crunched, and a piece of bark fell to the ground. In that moment, somewhere nearby, a sharp crack of a branch rang out. Artyom instantly raised his head. Rex spun around toward that direction, staring into the dense thicket. Silence. No steps, no breathing. Only the sensation that someone was watching. Hey, shouted Artyom. Is anyone there? No answer followed. Artyom frowned. He had worked in this district for a long time and knew local mushroom pickers rarely went this deep into the forest. And if they did, they usually made noise, but here it was like a ghost. But now was not the time to deal with strangers. The container was almost out of the wood. Artyom bent down again and pulled. Finally, after a long effort, the metal box tore free and fell at his feet. With a dull, heavy thud. The container was small, roughly the size of a showbox, but weighed much more, as if filled with metal or tools or something worse. The box was covered in rust, but faint symbols were visible on the lid. Old markings. The dust wiped away under his fingers, and Artyom saw the numbers 1954. Below was some sign looking like a warning symbol. "You're kidding," he muttered. 54. Is this military? The more he looked, the less he wanted to open the box, but retreat was impossible. Too late and too many questions. He squatted down, placed the box before him, and examined the lock. A simple metal latch, coated in resin and rust. Artyom pried it with his knife. It creaked slightly. Rex began barking at this moment. Loudly, sharply, anxiously. He jumped in front of Artyom, shielding him, and looked at something behind his back. Artyom stood up abruptly and turned around. Between the trees, someone was standing. A human figure. But motionless, as if merged with the shadow. Too far to see the face, but close enough to realize this person was definitely watching them. "Hey!" shouted Artyom again. "Who are you?" The figure didn't move. A second. Two. And then quietly, almost soundlessly, it vanished between the trees. Artyom swallowed. His heart beat faster. "Great," he exhaled. Guests, too. He returned to the container. Leaving it closed had become even more dangerous. He put away the knife, grasped the latch with his fingers, and jerked the lid open. A smell hit his face immediately. Sharp, metallic, damp, like old cellar iron and rot. Rex grimaced and stepped back. Inside lay fabric, dense, rolled up. At first glance, ordinary old material, soaked by time. Artyom carefully unrolled it and saw a glass jar, large and cylindrical, tightly closed with a metal lid. On the jar, a handwritten label was pasted, faded, almost unreadable. But one phrase he made out. Experiment number 7. Inside the jar lay something. Gray, uneven, too organic to be just an object. Artyom felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever this was, someone hid it in the tree over half a century ago. And now, after so many years, he accidentally found what perhaps no one was meant to see. He slowly lifted the jar, turned it toward the light, and saw something inside move barely noticeably. Artyom froze, holding the jar at eye level. Inside, in the murky liquid, there really was something, dense, shriveled, with a dull grayish hue. At first glance, a piece of tissue or skin. But when he turned the jar, this entity smoothly turned following the liquid and shuddered slightly. Not like a living creature, but rather like something that was once alive. "What the?" exhaled Artyom, feeling his breathing become uneven. He placed the jar on the ground and stepped back. Rex pressed against his leg, whining quietly, as if trying to stop his master from further actions. The dog rarely behaved this way. Usually brave and confident, he was clearly scared now. Artyom looked at the container again. Besides the jar, 2 more items lay in it, an old paper envelope sealed with wax, and a small metal mug, as if from a military kit. The mug was dry, without a hint of liquid or rust. The envelope, conversely, was entirely soaked with moisture and barely holding together. He reached for the envelope, but at that moment, Rex yapped sharply and nudged him in the leg, as if warning. Artyom flinched. "What is it now, Rex?" he asked nervously. The dog looked toward the same thicket where the stranger had stood recently. His tail was tucked, but his body tense. Artyom stood up, looked around. "If this is some prankster, come out. I am armed." There was, of course, no answer. He decided he must first understand what lay in the container, and then deal with the uninvited guest. Returning to the box, Artyom cautiously opened the envelope. The wax broke off easily, being too old. Inside were several sheets of paper, yellowed and brittle. The ink had blurred, but a few lines could still be read. He unfolded the first sheet and read aloud to keep his concentration. Sample delivered in the morning. Reaction unpredictable. Isolation required. Artyom fell silent, caught his breath. Oh God! The second sheet was preserved worse. On it, only fragments of sentences could be made out. Transformation. Must not get out. Stop the project at any cost. The third sheet was dated the same year, 1954. And on it, in large, almost panicked handwriting, was scrawled, "Bury, hide, show to no one." Artyom felt sudden weakness in his hands. He squatted, clutching the sheets in his fingers. "So what am I supposed to do with this now?" he whispered. Rex came closer, nudged his nose into his shoulder. Artyom absently stroked the dog. "I get it, boy, I don't like it either." He shifted his gaze back to the jar. It stood quietly, as if everything he saw a second ago had only been his imagination. He picked it up, examined the lid. It had markings too. The same numbers, the same symbols. And a word that made goosebumps race across his skin: biology. "So, it's something biological," he said quietly. "But what specifically?" He peered closely at the contents again. Inside was something like a large fragment of flesh, but the shape was irregular, non-human. And at the same time vaguely familiar, like a brain, but elongated. Or an organ of some animal, or something that shouldn't exist. Artyom felt his breathing quicken. Behind him, a crack sounded again. Much closer. He spun around abruptly. "I said, come out." In the shadows between the trees, a figure flickered. On this occasion, it was closer. Much closer. A man in a long dark jacket. The face was indistinguishable. But the posture was wary. Leaning forward, as if he were studying them. Rex barked and lunged forward, but Artyom held him back. "Stay, Rex." The figure froze, then slowly raised a hand. The movement was strange, careful. Cautious, and the gesture was not threatening, but pleading. As if that person was trying to warn, but in the next second, he vanished, dissolving between the trees as silently as he appeared. Artyom felt the situation spiraling out of control. He grabbed the jar, closed the container, and started looking around. "We need to get out of here. Immediately." He took the container under his arm, called Rex, and stepped back along the path. For several minutes he had felt as if someone was tracking him with their gaze, hiding in the forest thickness. But perhaps it was just nerves. They walked a few meters, and everything went quiet again. But when Artyom looked back for the last time, he saw on the place where the container had stood, a fresh mark remained on the tree bark. As if someone had just touched the trunk with a hand, too fresh to be accidental. And then he realized, they were not alone in the woods. And the stranger was not just an observer. He knew what lay in the tree, and he wouldn't allow it to be taken just like that. Artyom walked at a brisk pace, almost breaking into a run. The forest around seemed different now. Darker, denser, as if the trees had moved closer. The path he came by was no longer visible. Everything blurred together, and even familiar landmarks vanished. But he moved forward without stumbling. Adrenaline guided him. Rex stayed close, sometimes overtaking, sometimes looking back. The container under his arm felt hot, though the metal was cold. The jar inside rolled dully, and every knock caused him to shudder. He couldn't shake the thought that the thing inside the jar sensed movement. Heard, lived, or worse, waited. The forest broke the silence again with a sharp snap of a branch. Artyom looked up and froze. About 20 meters away stood the same figure, now much closer than before. The man was tall, wearing a long jacket thrown over something dark. The hood's shadow hid his face, but Artyom clearly saw him raise his hands. Palms forward, a gesture of peace. Or request. Rex roared, straining the leash. Artyom held him, not taking his eyes off the stranger. "Who are you?" His voice cracked. "And what the hell is this?" The figure didn't move, only slowly, very slowly raised a left hand and pointed back to the tree from where Artyom had taken the container. Artyom shook his head. "No, I'm not going back." "Too late. You explain what this is." No answer followed. Only the quiet sigh of the wind. "If you are threatening." Artyom placed his hand on his holster, but the figure suddenly stepped back sharply and dissolved between the trunks. This time as if through them, without a sound, as if he hadn't been there at all. Rex yelped, jerking forward. "Rex, stay!" Artyom commanded sharply. The dog froze, but his gaze was fixed on the spot where the stranger vanished. Artyom closed his eyes for a second. Need to gather thoughts. He has evidence, an old container, documents, and a jar with an unknown organ. He needs to reach the road, call for backup. Let the experts deal with it. He took a step, and a tree to his right creaked quietly. Artyom turned and saw fresh tracks on the bark, as if someone had passed by just seconds ago. Too light, too neat, as if a person glided past without touching the ground. This terrified him most of all. He took a deep breath and continued on his way. The forest gradually began to thin. The noise of the road could already be heard somewhere ahead. Cars, people, safety. But Rex suddenly stopped and growled low, hollowly, as if a new unknown rage appeared in his chest. He stared straight at the container in Artyom's hands. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Rex yapped, then his tail dropped again, ears pressed back, and in the next second, the jar inside the container thumped. Hard, sharply, as if someone struck from within. Artyom almost dropped the container. "No," he exhaled. "This can't be." He stopped, placed the box on the ground. Rex retreated but didn't take his eyes off it. Artyom slowly, very cautiously opened the lid. The jar lay on its side. The liquid inside was foaming slightly, as if shaken. And then Artyom saw movement. Small, barely noticeable, but it was movement. The fragment inside seemed to quiver slightly, as if waves were passing through it. Sometimes as if it were trying to straighten out. "Jesus," he whispered. He couldn't believe his eyes. It wasn't just an organ, not just a sample, it was something artificial, distorted. Or neither of those words fit. Rex started barking again, but now the bark was different. Sharp, anxious, warning. And then Artyom heard footsteps to the left, right, behind, as if someone was walking around them in circles. Another second, and he realized there were multiple steps. "Hey, who's here?" he shouted, drawing his knife. Silence, and then a whisper, unintelligible, like voices passing through the trees. They were quiet, but there were many. As if dozens of people were talking amongst themselves in a language he didn't know. Artyom felt the blood freeze in his veins. He pressed the jar to his chest, grabbed the container, and stepped back. "Rex, to me." The dog ran up instantly. They began running through the bushes, through low branches. Artyom could already see a clearing. The road was very close. The whispers kept pace. Sometimes it seemed they were right over his ear. And then the final dash. A few more steps. But as soon as they came out to the glade before the road, right from behind a large fallen tree emerged the figure in the long dark jacket. He stood directly in front of Artyom. No threats, no movements. Just him, the unknown one. And then for the first time he raised his head. And Artyom saw the face. Pale, too pale for a person walking in the woods. Eyes appearing clouded, yet seeing. Skin with a grayish tint and light, almost imperceptible scars around the neck. Like old traces of medical procedures. The stranger spoke quietly, hoarsely, "Don't take it." Artyom stepped back. "Who are you?" But the man only raised a hand and pointed back to the forest again. "Return it," he wheezed. "This is not for humans." Rex stood in front of Artyom, ready to lunge forward. Artyom felt the situation had become critical. He gripped the jar, felt a pulsation under his fingers, or imagined it, and realized there was no choice left. He had to decide right now what was more important, people's safety or the fact that he was possibly holding a threat in his hands. Artyom stood as if rooted to the ground. The air around seemed to become heavier. Breathing became harder. Rex growled low but didn't attack. He felt the same thing as his master, danger, but not the obvious kind. A strange, incomprehensible danger, like the tremor before an earthquake. The unknown man took a step closer. His movements were unrealistically fluid, as if he moved through water. Artyom gripped the jar tighter. The glass felt warm under his fingers. Too warm. "What is in this jar?" he asked quietly. "What were you hiding in the tree?" The stranger raised his head, and Artyom saw his eyes clearly for the first time. There were no bright glints in them, only a dull, sickly light. But in that light was pain, enormous. Genuine. "We made a mistake," he wheezed. "Back then, long ago." He coughed, as if every word came with difficulty. "Experiment. Life that shouldn't have been created. It changes everything it touches." Artyom felt a chill race down his spine. He looked at the jar, at the creature floating in the murky liquid, which was impossible to define. "Is it alive?" he asked. The stranger shook his head. "Not anymore. But if released, it becomes different. Strong. Uncontrollable." He pointed to the container again. "Return it to where it was." The tree held it. "It holds it." Artyom felt panic rising inside him. "I can't just leave this in the woods. This is a crime. It's dangerous for people. I have to." "You don't understand," interrupted the stranger. "It's dangerous for the world, not for people. For everything." He took a step. Another one. Now they were almost at arm's length. Rex growled louder but backed away. Strange behavior. He was afraid. Artyom raised the jar higher. "If you come closer, I'll smash it." The stranger froze, and for the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. "You mustn't," he shouted so sharply that Artyom flinched. "Don't touch, don't break. If you damage it, what's inside will wake up. It's not an organ. It's a seed. A seed." The word hit his head as if someone abruptly turned on a light. "What seed?" His voice became hoarse. The stranger shook his head. "Not of this world. We found it long ago. Wanted to study, wanted to use. Fools. The seed changed every living thing nearby. He touched his neck. "I was close too long." Now Artyom understood. The lump in his throat became denser. "So, you are infected too?" he asked quietly. The stranger nodded slowly. "I am not the first, not the last. But I hold it. For now, I hold it. But if you take it away, someone else will find it, open it, use it. The seed is smart, it waits. But when disturbed, it grows." Artyom lowered his eyes to the jar. Inside, something twitched softly, as if confirming his words. At that moment, Artyom realized everything he was holding was not just evidence. It was something that cannot belong to humans. Rex yapped quietly, as if supporting a decision that hadn't been voiced yet. Artyom raised his head. "If I return it, you will leave. Never appear again." The stranger sighed. "I will leave, but you must hurry." The seed sensed it. "Need to be quick." Artyom looked at the forest, at the path he ran along, to where the old tree stood. He looked at the stranger again, at his trembling hands, grayish skin, clouded eyes, at the person who was perhaps no longer human long ago, but was still trying to save someone other than himself. And suddenly realized the decision was already made. He gripped the jar. "Fine. We are going back." Rex barked quietly but confidently. The stranger stepped back, giving way. And Artyom turned back into the forest, which now seemed alive, observant, agitated. He was ready for danger ahead, but he was also ready for what he had to do. Artyom walked back through the woods, feeling every step resonate in his chest as a heavy but right decision. Rex didn't stray even half a meter, constantly looking back, as if afraid something would follow them. The forest around became quieter, almost too much so, as if it were waiting. When they approached the old tree, the sun was already sliding down, painting the foliage in warm orange light. The growth on the trunk still looked alien. But now Artyom understood. The tree didn't hold evil, the tree hid it. He set the container on the ground, took out the jar, and held his breath for a moment. Inside, something quivered again, barely noticeably, like the weak heartbeat of an alien creature. "Sorry," he said quietly, not knowing himself to whom exactly. Artyom carefully placed the jar back into the hollow. The resin on the bark was soft, as if the tree itself reached out to close the wound. He pressed the edges of the bark again as best he could. Then he stepped back, and at that moment, a faint rustle came from the depths of the forest, not anxious, but rather relieved. Like a sigh. The stranger was nowhere to be found, as if he dissolved together with the shadow in which he stood. Rex snorted quietly and sat nearby. Artyom placed his palm on his head. "Let's go home, friend," he said wearily. They walked slowly toward the road, and with every step, the forest became more ordinary, more transparent. As if closing the door behind them itself. Already on the roadside, Artyom looked back for the last time. The old tree stood in the same place, but seemed slightly taller, slightly calmer. And for the first time all day, he felt a strange warm sensation. No fear, no anxiety, but gratitude. As if the forest, having survived someone else's mistake, thanked him for not becoming another one.